When I was young, I fell in love with this world.
I fell in love with the silence of the desert,
the smell of the earth after rain,
the plains of South Dakota. I fell in love with the way that the world holds us.
I am a climate scientist.
I am a Palestinian Texan.
An all-around general nerd.
I am an immigrant.
An advocate.
I'm a leader.
I am a Black girl from the hood who's trying to change climate policy.
When I look around today,
I see a lot of brokenness,
corruption, divisions between the haves and the have-nots,
living systems of the planet fraying.
And I feel worried about our future.
I feel grief.
I feel ashamed.
Really angry.
Heartbroken.
Numb. On good days, I feel courageous.
To me, the climate crisis
is an economic issue.
It's an immigration issue.
Spiritual issue.
A feminist issue.
A right now issue.
It's the ultimate intersectional justice issue.
I'm determined to be part of the solution because
I want there to be children on this planet in 7 generations.
Because everyone has a role to play.
Because it's the right thing to do.
It's easy to imagine a future that is bleak.
I can also imagine transformation.
People rising in resilience.
100% clean energy. Farms that sequester carbon in their soil.
A world that is inclusive. A future that works for all of us.
I am a woman.
I'm a woman.
I am leading on climate.
We are leading on climate.
Join us.
Join us.
Hi, friend. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's really nice to see you.
Likewise. Yeah, we normally just talk on the phone and save our rural internet the trouble of trying to see each other's faces.
This is true. We're bringing back the conference call. That's one thing. That's one thing we're working on together.
Yes. The anti-Zoom brigade over here.
Totally.
So one of the things I think is so important about the way you think about how to address the climate crisis, and one of my sort of favorite phrases that you have coined is that the climate crisis is a leadership crisis. And I think it would be great if you could just unpack for others who don't have the gift of your voice in their ear on a more regular basis. So what do you mean by that? And what does that imply about the work that needs doing and how we might get it done?
Yeah. Well, I think you just said it so well, right? That the leadership that we've had to date, well-intentioned though it may be, it hasn't gotten us where we need to go. And in part, part of, I think, the sort of theory of change that you and I share is that we need leadership that is both more characteristically feminine, but also more committedly feminist. So we need climate leadership that is really rooted in care and connection and compassion and creativity. And I mean, that just sort of makes sense, right? That we need to bring our full set of superpowers to this work. And for far too long, a relatively small cabal of white men have dominated climate leadership, climate discourse. And there are things that certainly are not limited to any gender, but we see them coming in droves from women in the space. And we write about this in the beginning of All We Can Save. So one of them is the sort of simple but powerful shift from wanting to be in charge to being committed to making change. And we see that like linking arms, joyful following, passing the mic, shine theory, like all of that just it's kind of a generous collaboration, I think, that we see. The second is deeply committing to respond to the climate crisis in ways that heal systemic injustices rather than sidelining them or deepening them, right? And I think the sense that women have of like, yes, of course we can and we must solve all of these things at the same time. And that's not only something we can do, we will be more effective because of a multi-solving and intersectional approach. The third is bringing heart-centered and not just head-centered leadership, right? That like, we're in an existential crisis. Like, of course, there are a lot of feelings, right? Fear and grief and anger and uncertainty, but also courage and determination and love. And we need all of those in the mix. So welcoming the feels is part of that. And then the last one, you know, this is really, I love your commitment to this, that building community is an absolutely requisite foundation to building a better world. This is not about heroes. It's about the biggest and strongest team possible. And that demands that we take time and make space for the relational work. And I think that's also really different in this kind of transformational climate leadership.
I think one of the ways that we've come to describe this is that what's needed is a feminist climate renaissance, right? Like this is not about an upheaval or a revolution. It is not about excluding men. It is about thinking through the leadership that we need for this moment, as you say, the transformational leadership that we need, and thinking about it as an opportunity for rebirth, and feminism in its, you know, sort of dictionary definition of gender equality being a critical element that needs to be in place to get us there, so that we have all of the minds and hearts and creativity and community that can all be a part of this. So I just love how that phrase kind of sums up the dream that we would have this renaissance, this feminist climate renaissance, and sort of thinking about the opportunity for rebuilding and mending and interweaving our efforts.
Yeah. I think a lot about the verb upwelling, which is another good ocean term, right? It's not like
the ocean is here for all of your metaphor needs. It always.
So on the topic of justice, you wrote a really powerful op-ed earlier this summer that rightfully got a lot of attention, and I'm curious. Justice seems to be finally getting centered more regularly and more fully in climate conversations. Where are you seeing momentum that's exciting, and where do you still think we have really serious work to do?
That op-ed that you referenced, that was published in the Washington Post in early June. That was basically like my letter to white environmentalists. Because, you know, in this new wave of this uprising for the movement for Black Lives, it just became very clear that a lot of people, well-meaning though they may be in the climate movement, were not connecting the dots, and that is certainly very, very much to our detriment. So thinking about how we can build the biggest team, that doesn't just mean women, that means people of color. And the environment and climate movement has traditionally not been super welcoming and not been deliberate in its work to draw people in. Certainly not deliberate enough because it hasn't worked, right? And we know that is a big miss because we see the polling of who cares and is most concerned about climate change, and we know that people of color are, many percentage points more sort of like aware of the problem and wanting their elected representatives to do something about that. It's 49% of white people who are concerned about climate change compared to 57% of Black people and 69% of Latinx people. And this is the polling from Yale and George Mason universities that they've been doing for over a decade. And I think that is an important misconception to upend, that somehow people of color don't get it or they're not on board, whereas the reality is these are communities that have been marginalized and under-resourced, under-invested in, and we have a crazy system where property taxes pay for education, so you have this like vicious cycle of unequal access to quality education, for example. And so there is a deep understanding of the risks and the things that we're facing in communities of color. But that because of all the injustices and inequality in the world, there isn't an opportunity for a lot of people of color to participate, not just because the environmental movement hasn't been welcoming, but also because we're dealing with other issues like police brutality and and all of the other trappings of a white supremacist society that make it hard to get through the day, let alone launch your own climate campaign.
Yeah.
And so thinking about how we can lift these burdens of racism and sexism off of all of the people who already care, I think is a really important step to remove that barrier, because we do in fact need to build the biggest, strongest team possible to tackle the biggest, scariest, most all-encompassing challenge humanity has ever faced. And so making sure that we are doing that in a way that like very deliberately says all are needed, all are welcome, will be absolutely critical. And that goes for race, that goes for gender, that goes for class, it goes for geography and level of education, and on and on and on, right? Yeah. And so the work that we did curating the anthology work, I know how hard I know what the spreadsheet looked like, trying to make sure we were like including as much of that diversity of not just areas of expertise, but perspectives in 3 generations and geographies and race and all of it. So yeah. I'm wondering, Katharine, if you might want to end by sharing our epigraph.
Yeah. I like that.
And explaining the title.
Yeah. So this book was hard to name. Big
the whiteboards, the spreadsheets.
Oh my. Oh my. It was an ideation fiasco for many weeks, if not months. And our editor at One World, Nicole Counts, we felt really lucky to work with another amazing woman, a woman of color on this project. And she sent us this stanza from Adrienne Rich's poem, Natural Resources. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. And we took those words, all I cannot save, and we made it collective, and we made it a focus on what's still possible. So all we can save, I think, is much more than the name of a book. It really is kind of a guiding principle for really what are our generations of work to do.
And the name of the nonprofit around that is the All We Can Save Project, because that remains the mission, right? To save all we can. And then the last thing I'll share is just the subtitle of the book is kind of that's the what we need, right, to get there. Truth, courage, and solutions for the climate crisis. And I lied. There's one other thing I'm going to say, as I am wont to do. As we were sort of writing the conclusion and summing things up, what we noticed, apart from the truth, courage, and solutions threads that are woven throughout the book and throughout the work of all of these incredible women leading on climate, not just within the book, but the broader the effort and full spectrum of leadership, is these two themes, to bring it back to how we opened this conversation of community, the imperative of building community around solutions, and not an individualistic approach, just simply not being a winning one. And then that this work is so grounded in love for the planet, for each other, for possibility, and that thinking about love and community as a fierce motivating force, and the way we're going to get it done, I think is just such a heartwarming and bolstering emergence from our curation as we had the chance to step back and look at what everyone was putting forward into the world.
Totally. I feel like that's a great place to wrap our conversation with ferocious love. I'm so grateful to work with you.
Oh, woman, likewise.